A leaky oil tank under a house on Duluth Park Point has created extensive soil pollution, triggered an ongoing state investigation, and left a woman homeless.
The problems all came to light when the house was put up for sale. Barbara Riles is here. Barbara, it sounds like a serious situation.
You know, Dave, Michelle, it's even worse than serious. It's a very complicated, very sad situation. The small but picturesque house sits on the bay side of Minnesota Avenue on Duluth Park Point. To look at it from the front, you'd never imagine all the problems the little house has caused. When Rebecca Thompson first saw this house at 1539 Minnesota Avenue, it was love at first sight. It reminded her of her childhood home on the East Coast. She thought it would make a perfect retirement home and immediately began to negotiate a deal.
And I fell in love with it right away. So, and my kids are basically in Minnesota. My grandchildren are here. So I don't want to leave them and go back east, but I miss the water and I miss the sand dunes.
She sold her home in Faribault, Minnesota, packed up all her belongings, and with building excitement, she arrived in Duluth the evening before the scheduled closing. It was then that her nightmare began.
It was fuel oil. And it was a stench that when you breathe it in, it makes your nose burn and your lungs burn, my throat burn, my eyes water. It's unmistakable.
Rebecca began to ask questions and found that the homeowner had been informed at least a year earlier that his above-ground oil tank in the backyard had been leaking. A new oil tank had been put in, but apparently the old tank had leaked for a long time. Rebecca still wanted the house, and with a clear belief that the contamination was just slight, she went ahead and signed the purchase papers. It was only when the cleanup crews began to dig up the soil in the backyard that they found the oil had saturated clear down to the water table.
Originally there was, actual visible product in the ground and on the water table. And after the cleanup, there was just a sheen on the water table, and that's basically where it is now.
But the stench of the oil was now dangerously strong, so the excavators left a hole to ventilate it. Unfortunately, Duluth experienced a strong rainfall which filled the hole and leaked into the home, soaking floorboards and carpets with oily water.
As the water raised up and went to the boards, the fuel oil got on all of the boards and it soaked up into the house.
Structural engineers reported the house had been severely weakened. Cracks began to show up in the foundation and in the walls, leaving Rebecca with nowhere to live. To make matters worse, the fumes aggravated her asthma, leaving her not only homeless, but sick. At this point, it's difficult to say who, if anyone's responsible. The homeowner sold the house on an as-is basis, but Rebecca says what she paid for is not what she got. The Pollution Control Agency says the mess must be cleaned up, and they want to know who's going to pay for it. Meanwhile, Rebecca's living in temporary housing paid for by the Salvation Army. But that funding runs out in August. After that, she's out on the street, Dave and Michelle.
Barbara, this situation sounds like it can't get much worse.
Well, actually it can. With her multiple disabilities that you saw in our report, Rebecca's medical costs are very high. Right now, she's on Social Security income, or SSI, but a person on SSI has to live in any home that they own, or they can't get those medical benefits. The problem is Rebecca can't live in that home, and of course she can't sell it. So not only will she be homeless, but she might not have any medical care either.
Thanks, Barbara. Well, tomorrow we'll take a look at how extensive the contamination is and what it will take to clean it up, as well as who's responsible for paying for it.
Wow, real catch-22. Well, a major change in the way Duluth deals with minors and cigarettes. Well, extensive oil contamination beneath a house on Duluth Park Point is creating a nightmare for one woman who had thought it was going to be her dream home.
State pollution experts say this is a hazard and it must be cleaned up.
The cleanup could financially wipe out this woman who says she's only trying to retire peacefully. Barbara Riles has more in this I-Team investigation.
On paper, Rebecca Thompson owns this pretty little house on Park Point, but she can't live here at 1539 Minnesota Avenue, and it looks like she never will.
The bottom line is it's not safe. It's not safe structurally, and it's not safe health-wise. It's not a livable house.
Experts say the house is structurally unsound. The floor is rotten, and a strong oil smell permeates the house and everything in it. There was a slight smell when Rebecca signed the purchase papers, but she says the previous owner assured her it was just a small leak from an old, unused backyard oil tank. That's not the way it turned out.
For the most part, it's just on the property. There may be residual contamination off the property.
Rebecca called in experts to get rid of the oily sand, but when they dug down, they discovered the bottom of the house was significantly rotted. They couldn't excavate all the contaminated dirt without endangering the house. They left a hole in the backyard to ventilate the smell and told Rebecca the bad news. Unfortunately, rains flooded the hole, and oily water seeped up through the bottom, further weakening the structure.
The floors, some of them have sunk, there's ridges, it's not safe.
Rebecca, who suffers from asthma and other multiple disabilities, spent every penny she had on this, her dream home. Now she has nothing. She can't even afford an attorney to help sort out who's to blame here, and government-funded legal aid doesn't take real estate cases.
I never pictured myself as someone that would be homeless.
Meanwhile, the State Pollution Control Agency says the spill has to be cleaned up, and it will be expensive.
The corrective action for this could cost between, and this is just a rough estimate, $60,000 to $150,000.
The situation has aggravated Rebecca's medical conditions and left her a nervous wreck.
I've seen it crush Rebecca's spirits at times, and I know that only because of a deep faith that she has and an inner strength that she's surviving.
This is a tragic situation that could happen to anyone, but there are ways people can protect themselves. One of those is to hire an independent home inspector before buying a house.
By having an inspection, it brings you back to the basis of looking at the mechanical and the overall physical condition of the home, rather than just the cosmetic areas of it, location, appearance, things like that.
The State Pollution Control Agency has a program that helps people pay for cleanups when they can't afford them. If both the home seller and Rebecca qualify, they could be reimbursed up to 92.5% of the cleanup costs. But that still leaves Rebecca with all her life savings tied up in a house in which she'll probably never be able to live. In Duluth, Barbara Riles, Channel 6 News.
Rebecca Thompson is currently living in a shelter funded by, or an apartment funded by emergency funding, but that funding runs out in August.
And so far, Rebecca's dream of living on Port Point has cost her life savings. It's left her penniless, and now it's left her homeless.
Quite a story.
Indeed.
Well, next, George Kessler with